Hello, everyone, and welcome back to More Than a Muse. I'm Stauney.
And I'm Sadie. Happy More Than a Muse Day. Welcome. Happy to have you
Yes.
here. Excited to jump into this topic today because it's a niche one, something I had never even heard about until you brought it up as a potential topic and we started researching.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited to talk about it. But before we dive in, is there anything we need to recap outside of this topic?
Merch, you guys. Look, we matched
Look
today.
it. Every time we match for merch, we are never planning it. It's always
I know.
serendipitous.
This just happened. We're
Granted, I guess
wearing
it's a very
our,
likely thing.
yeah, like, why wouldn't I wear my merch when we're recording?
Exactly.
We're wearing our Myths of Madness sweatshirts that are still for sale from last
Mhm.
year. So you could go check those
Think
out. I think it's perfect for October.
it's been our most popular merch item literally ever. It's pretty
Yes.
cute.
It has all the things that women get called in a derogatory way. So,
Exactly. But we're
especially when they're
reclaiming.
mad. Yeah, of course,
Mhm.
we're reclaiming, along with Hysteria, which all of that merch is also still on sale. So, go check it
Exactly.
out.
Yeah, we love it. Well, the last time we recorded, we did not know what was going to be on.
That's true.
We didn't know what Taylor Swift's announcement would be. So now we do. We're personally big Taylor Swift fans. So
Hmm.
perhaps we might be catering our future content so that we are all well informed listeners when we listen to The Life of
Yeah.
a Showgirl in October.
Guys,
We'll
September
see.
is going to be very packed with some Taylor Swift topics. So, I hope you're all
Yes.
excited for that. Obviously, they'll still be on theme with More Than a Muse.
Hmm.
But yeah, we like to look for some of her references
Absolutely.
and look into them
Well, I was going to
beforehand.
say the
So,
great thing, though, about doing things Taylor Swift is that it's not even Taylor Swift. It's just the other women that she continues to reference,
I know, I love
i.e.,
it.
Elizabeth Taylor, Ophelia, Natalie Wood,
Yeah.
perhaps, which is our theory.
Yes. I think it's Natalie Wood. I've seen
Hmm.
some weird like Pinocchio theories and stuff, but
For this song
I
title
don't
called
know.
Wood.
I do think it's probably Natalie Wood. Maybe I'm completely wrong, but it would
I
make
like that theory.
sense. Yeah.
I like that
So,
theory.
especially Natalie Wood drowned, you guys. So did Ophelia.
Her
Feels
cover
a
is
little
in.
fitting.
That's true. We'll see. Well, Stani, would you like to introduce our topic today?
Yes. My friend from work who actually does film photography posted about this on her photography page, just like a short little
Cool.
snippet. And I was like, oh, we are definitely diving into that. So we are talking about Shirley cards, which is this strange little phenomenon from early film photography, all surrounding a woman named Shirley, who I think was just a random employee that they snapped a photo of. And we're talking about how that fits in with racism in early photography and all of that.
So crazy that a random woman named Shirley just doing her job becomes a icon in film photography and for a while the gold standard of what was right and good
I
for film
know.
photography. Anyways, well, we have a lot to go through. So the first thing I just want to reference is that there is a 1977 book called On Photography by Susan Sontag, and she wrote that photos not only depict reality but also reflect the viewer's perspective, thus serving as both a documentation and an interpretation of the world. Although also, author James Baldwin said, "It is said that the camera cannot lie, but rarely we do allow it to do anything else. Since the camera sees what you pointed at, the camera sees what you want it to see." Which is a good baseline to put it because you're thinking it's photography. It just captures what is already existing in real life. How could it be much more complicated than that? Well,
So
unfortunately,
complicated.
so
Oh man. No, I like the idea of where he says, rarely do we allow it to do anything else, which is true.
mhm.
Anything other than lie. And I think even though we're not talking about it in the age of Instagram and everything else, it is
True.
important to remember that like cameras can lie because people can lie and people are the one taking the photos. So
And
it's
also the
really
ones editing the photos.
huh? So it's really not that hard for a camera to lie, actually,
Hmm.
sadly enough. Along with that, what even caused all of this? So, in the second half of the 20th century, chromogenic prints were the most popular commercial color photographs. And however, the process required to produce them became really complex and expensive. Not everyone has a darkroom in their basement or even knows how to use one. And so managing the production became the work of professionals rather than amateurs, which was a very important shift from earlier in the 20th and 19th centuries. These prints were mass produced at commercial labs, drugstores, and printing businesses. You think of it like Walgreens.
Yeah, of
And
course.
they all used to have their own little like dark rooms, and they would be developing film photography in the back room that people would bring in. And that was still happening when we were kids.
Yeah. I would get cameras, little disposable cameras, every time we'd go on vacation, and then I'd have to, send it off to Walgreens or drop it off so that they could give me my photos.
And that was happening with trained technicians all around, preparing the printing machines and then calibrating the photos based on the standards that were sent in from the film manufacturers. And if you've heard of Kodak, they're like one of the most popular American film manufacturers, and they were extremely popular at the time. They would send in what they called a Shirley card to each printing business. And the card's name was just the name of the woman pictured in the first version, a Kodak employee named Shirley. She also was known as the color photo girl. She was a white brunette dressed in white, wearing a pearl necklace, and developed using a blend of color tones on the card, which, if you know anything about printing, it uses like CMYK or cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. So it's a similar thing with this, where they're calibrating all of those different colors so that when they're developing it, they can figure out what calibration of colors that they need to use in the film process to make it look normal. And that's what she's labeled as, developed using a blend of color tones on the card. Shirley had light-colored eyes and fair skin, and underneath her portrait was a label that said normal, setting the standard for chemical film developing using machines calibrated to obtain the proper skin tone in prints. So the idea was to ensure that all of the Shirleys looked good in every photo. So your photo would be calibrated so that you don't come out too green or too pink or too blue. You look normal.
Or you look like yourself, in theory.
Yes. The problem is, though, is that you are using a calibration card of one person to set the standard for the entire vast world of people that are taking pictures. And film actually had a very similar thing. Film and TV, they had a China girl, which was a reference of porcelain mannequins used in early screen tests for makeup standards on sets. And it was very similar thing where they'd have one photo that they're calibrating all of the film for. And of course, it's a white person.
So that potentially causes some issues because, like you said, the process did not account for difference in negatives. The resulting prints could be different from one another and sometimes just look wrong, and they weren't really adjusted for the amount, quality of light in the scene, or most importantly, the subjects that were photographed, which of course could make a big difference. They were only being calibrated in the appearance of Shirley and other white women, so pictures of people with dark skin were often poorly rendered, particularly if people with different skin tones were photographed together. Calibrating the machine to prefer lighter skin tones could even make people with darker skin unrecognizable. And these poorly printed images have hidden the faces of Black subjects, including from their loved ones and future generations, which is like the sad note of that's why photographs are so important. Like sometimes that's the only thing that you have left of people. So it is important if the photographs you're getting don't look like you or don't look like the people that you know.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily think Kodak came out and was like maliciously,
Of course,
let us be
no.
evil and make it so that no one with a darker skin tone has a picture that turns out well of themselves. But it just goes to show like the ignorance that's involved in growing technology a lot of the times that like no one thinks about. No one went, oh, I was grabbing this random employee, Shirley, and calibrating the entire film developing process to her skin tone is going to be an issue. They just didn't even think about it.
Totally. And I think also it shows, I think, like the pressure is often on what's the most economical. And so I'm sure it was the most economical choice, especially like in a business venture, right? Just choose one standard that you would send off for everything and just assume that it would be fine rather than take the time to get, bless you, the multiple calibrations, the multiple different standards. If people weren't pressuring you for that, like why would you spend the extra money? Why would she do that? there's good reason. But if your only objective is to make sure you're making as much money, then you'd probably be less incentivized to do so at first.
Yep. And sadly, it took them quite a while before they were incentivized to do
Yes.
different.
And
But
we'll talk about what eventually caused that, which is not a spoiler
oh
alert, it's
man,
not great.
no, it's not. But before we dive into that, let's move back a little bit before the Shirley card into the 19th century, when I didn't know this, the most photographed man in the world.
In the 19th, yes.
If you had to think of someone off the top of your head, would this have even come to mind?
Mm-mm.
Because to me, I don't think it would have for me either. It would have been like, oh, maybe like a
Abraham
president.
Lincoln, yeah, a president,
Yeah.
of course.
But it was a Frederick Douglass
Mm-hmm.
who was an orator and abolitionist. And what he would do is he would go travel all around the country speaking to large crowds and making arguments to end the enslavement of Black people. And then on days he had no scheduled lectures, he would go to a daguerreotype studio and have his picture taken. And his whole point of this was to use these images to show a positive view of a Black person, to oppose negative caricatures that were commonplace in newspapers. So he had this handsome, dignified portrait of himself to show, look, this is what Black people are like. Like, you don't have to follow all of the horrible
stereotypes that are being, maliciously, what's the word? Distributed.
And you'll notice they didn't have an issue with calibrating skin tone back then because, first off, all of the images were in black and white. But second off, each photo was being developed by the photographer themselves, and they were calibrating each image individually without a set standard. So just based on that. So it's only when it became more of a mass production
mass producing
type situation that it led to there being like a need for there to be a set standard for each film.
I thought that was so cool to learn about, and to continue with like how photography has played such an important tool. W.E.B. Du Bois, an African-American scholar that was born just about 50 years after Douglass, he also continued this tradition, knew that the power of displaying Black images to sway American consciousness. He knew how important that would be. And he used pictures to showcase his achievements with material that included portraits of educated Black individuals, images that he showed in his exhibit of American Negroes in the 1900 World's Fair in Paris. Something that's interesting, though, is that eventually he grew leery of photography because obviously it has a powerful way to push back against the stereotype, but it was starting to work against him because he noticed that the average white photographer does not know how to deal with colored skins, and the resulting pictures of Black people were often a horrible botch. So this isn't just a thing that Kodak started. It was something that, white photographers just didn't really probably feel the need to even learn. 1915, that year, D.W. Griffith released his film, The Birth of a Nation. And this movie fabricated a false narrative of the Civil War and offered a redemptive account of the acts of the Ku Klux Klan. What? Griffith depicted the white supremacist secret society saving the nation from lecherous Black people who are actually white actors in blackface.
Of course.
Of course. And his film became the most loved movie in the nation.
Which makes me sick. What do you mean that this was the most loved movie in the nation? This was like the Titanic of that time period. What?
This isn't true. This isn't what happened. Crazy. It was even watched in the White House by its fan-in-chief, President Woodrow Wilson. Griffith was a quote-unquote masterful movie maker who pioneered the close-up, scenic long shot and the crosscut. And he created a film that further contaminated the country. But negative portrayals of Black Americans took on a new force as, like I said, within a year after the birth of a nation, the Great Migration from the South to the North began. While many books will say that African Americans came to the North for jobs, a truer reason was that they were, of course, fleeing for their lives. Terror was the law of the land, and lynchings were a very common occurrence. For many of these murders, cameras were ringside capturing burned and broken Black bodies. These Black photographs were often sold and distributed. And unlike Douglass portraits, they were not rendered to make African Americans more human, but less human. So the point of bringing that up is just to point out the fact that there is a history of racial bias and also photography being used as a tool either to fight for civil rights and civil liberties, but also unfortunately against it. We've talked about it many a times with the history of movies and stuff, but specifically in the way that they're even like they're capturing people, you know, and
Yeah.
the ability and the willingness to invest in the technology one, but also just willingness to invest in the time that would be required for some of these photographers to just like, know how to do it. So yeah, it's a very sad history of photography, to be honest. Like
It's
just like,
extremely
oh,
sad.
yeah, it's horrible. And it's really cool that I think Frederick Douglass like knew the power of that, and just to be able to see. And I think that's such a real thing. Sometimes if you're not around people, or if you're choosing to be ignorant to certain things, sometimes it's no, here's literally evidence in front of your face. I am. What do you have to say to me? And I think photos are a great way to do that, especially then when it's not like they could have TikTok. No one could go on TikTok live and like demonstrate that they're a competent human being, you know?
Yeah. Which,
It's
is
horrible.
like a benefit, I think, of modern technology that maybe we don't think about enough with like
Mm-hmm.
social media and everything else, that like it does allow us to see more perspectives from people who are different from us. Even like the whole Red Note situation, when a bunch of people switched over to Red Note and were able to see like the average life of a Chinese person living in
Totally.
China,
Uh-huh.
and like how it's really not that different from an American person living in the United States.
More recently, I've seen this where I've followed a couple people who just live in Iran, and they're
Hmm.
like day in my life of me in Iran, and it's just a normal, beautiful city. And all of the comments are just like, wow, I'm American and I feel so stupid. I literally just expected, I thought Iran was just like a sandy wasteland. But no, of course it's not. Like, it's a country that has been there for thousands of years. Like, of course there is infrastructure, you know? And so it's just
Yeah.
crazy. Like, that was a real time live acknowledgement on my end of being like, oh, I have never seen this. I have never even taken the time out of my day to learn and to see for myself. And because it just showed up on my For You page, now I'm like, oh my gosh, you know, it helped me like exist in reality for a moment.
Definitely. No, and that's like a powerful thing. Like social
Mm-hmm.
media is extremely toxic at times, but other
Of
times
course.
it's helping us actually recognize that even though everyone's different, like our lives aren't really that
Yeah,
different, we're all human.
exactly.
But yeah, I mean, that ended up becoming a huge issue as the Shirley cards became the baseline. And when you would get your film developed, lab technicians would use that image. And quality control just meant that Shirley was looking good, which left millions of people with overly dark photos obscuring their features. There was a BuzzFeed article in 2014 where an author, McFadden, wrote Kodak never encountered a groundswell of complaints from African Americans about their products. Many of us simply assumed the deficiencies of film emulsion performance reflected our inadequacies as photographers. So, like, we're just not doing good enough shooting
Oh,
pictures.
mm-mm.
Which honestly, I would probably think that too. I wouldn't be like,
Totally.
oh, film's not being calibrated for my skin tone. I'd be
No,
like,
you would just be like, oh
oh,
man, I must not be able to get the lighting right. Or I
yeah.
don't know. I guess you wouldn't think that it would go so deep as actually
Hmm.
they're not even willing to like figure this out for you. Sorry.
Nope. And then sadly, what ended up happening is that they didn't end up changing the print catalogs to depict subtle details until some of their biggest clients made a complaint. And those large, huge clients were chocolate companies and furniture companies because they couldn't get the right brown tones on the chocolates or show enough variation between different wood colors in their advertisements.
And that is why Kodak finally decided to figure this out, was because businesses were threatening to no longer use Kodak. Because why would you? Because it couldn't do it. It was Shirley was the standard even for chocolate and wood.
They're like, we shouldn't have had brown chocolate and brown wood then, and then it would have worked.
Another thing that it said is that there was a Concordia University professor. Research shows that Cage had also received complaints before from parents about the quality of graduation photographs because the color contrast made it nearly impossible to capture a diverse group of kids. Um,
Yeah. I was also thinking about that with everyone wearing like black caps and gowns.
oh,
That's like
yeah.
huge shadows that if it's not
Mm-hmm.
calibrated to capture dark tones. That's another thing that was the problem. Shirley was wearing a white shirt
Yeah.
with white
Mm-hmm.
pearls. It wasn't even accounting for different colored clothing. Like it couldn't calibrate dark colored clothes.
True. Which you would think that, oh, of course they'd want to make sure that all of these graduation photos can be done. No, at the end of the day, it was really the chocolate and furniture companies that forced Kodak's hands. This quote said it was never black flesh that was addressed as a serious problem at that time. So
Yep.
it wasn't even on the radar, unfortunately, which, yeah, it's just crazy. But what's cool is there was another camera company, Fuji, that became the film of choice for professional photographers shooting subjects with darker tones because the company developed color transparency film that was better than Kodak's for handling brown skin. Then eventually Kodak released a Gold Max, is that what it was? That as being, quote, able to photograph the details of a dark horse in low light, which was a coded message for being able to photograph people of color.
They had to advertise somehow, and
Yeah,
that's how they
exactly.
chose to do that. Which, oh my
Not
gosh.
great.
Can you imagine being the copywriter who came up with that?
Yeah, honestly.
A dark horse in low light. Okay, then. Something to mention about the whole Fujifilm Kodak situation is that, as wonderful it is that Fujifilm had better capacity for that, Fuji is a Japanese company. And
Mm-hmm.
so the availability of the film was probably a lot harder. Whereas Kodak at the time, you could probably find it every single corner drugstore. But Fujifilm
Mm.
probably was a little harder because it was an imported product. Yeah. But I also wonder if that's possibly why Fuji had better abilities with varying skin tones because it was coming from a different part of the world where there was a lot more variation in skin tone and awareness of that. Not
Yeah, I
that
was
the
gonna
United States
say
didn't have varying skin tones, we
totally.
did, but like awareness of the varying skin tone.
Or even just like an acknowledgement that, like, oh, we should be able to do something other than what is normal, aka
Yeah.
Shirley. Kodak did in the mid 1990s create a multiracial Shirley card with 3 women, one black, one white, and one Asian, which later included a Latina model, in an attempt to help camera operators collaborate skin tones. But these weren't really adopted because by that point, digital photography was rising, and so it just became less necessary. And so, yeah, the result was a film emulsion technology that still carried over social bias of early photographers. Like they just didn't fix it in time.
Mm-mm.
90s is a little bit too late when this is coming around in the 60s. You know,
Yep.
like by then there's just new technology. We're not going
They
to
waited
invest in
too
these other
long.
Shirley cards when most people aren't using that anymore.
Nope. People stopped developing film. It just wasn't a thing anymore.
Mm-hmm.
What is a total bummer, however, is that because of the way that they had set the standard for film color balancing in film photography, it transferred over to digital technology. And so the way that
Mm-hmm.
camera sensors are in automatic mode detect subjects is the same kind of color calibration that they did in early film. So it still has issues. There's a award-winning Netflix documentary called Coded Bias that even talks about how facial recognition algorithms don't see dark-skinned faces accurately. So, like, your screen not unlocking because of the color of your skin is something that's literally built into your iPhone that no
Mm-hmm.
one would even think about. But it's because of that early film color calibration.
Well, so we might touch on this again later, but like just the idea, so digital photographs or cameras, like their natural settings are always going to like prefer light skinned. And you have to learn extra steps to be able to make sure
Yeah.
everyone looks their best in the photo, which is, yeah, just an interesting little, like I said, extra.
It's so horrible. It's like you're literally fighting against technology that's built to make sure that you are not
Yeah,
considered like in the original output.
totally. And the
That's
whole
so
point,
frustrating.
as we said, of photos is supposed to capture a moment in time.
Yep.
Supposed to just capture it as is, but actually it's automatically working against that. Sorry. Really
There
stupid.
is a very good quote by Lauren Ledger Adam in here that says technology is supposed to level the playing field for everyone, but it's created by us humans and we all bring our own social norms into the mix. And I think that's an important thing to realize too, that it is not leveling the playing field, not when it's
Mm-hmm.
built with the infrastructure that we are
Absolutely.
given it.
Another example of just photography causing issues. So this is This is Polaroid now. So there were London-based artists Adam Broomberg and Oliver Chanarin. They spent a month in South Africa taking pictures on decades-old film that had been engineered with, of course, only white faces in mind. They used Polaroid's vintage ID2 camera, which had a boost button to increase the flash, enabling it to be used to photograph Black people for the passbooks or dompas that allowed the state to control their movements. But the result was raw snaps of some of the country's most beautiful flora, fauna from regions such as the Garden Route and the Karoo, an attempt by the artist to subvert what they saw was the camera's original sinister intent. They saw their work on show at Johannesburg Goodman Gallery that examines, quote, the racial notion that prejudice might be inherent in the medium of photography itself. And they argue that early color film was predicated on white skin, like we've talked about. In 1977, when Jean-Luc Godard was invited on an assignment to Mozambique, he refused to use Kodak film on the grounds that the stock was inherently racist. Correct. So we've got a couple people who are aware of it and doing great things. 1970, Caroline Hunter, who was a young chemist working for Polaroid in America, stumbled upon evidence that the company was effectively supporting apartheid. So she and her partner, Ken Williams, formed the Polaroid Workers Revolutionary Movement and campaigned for a boycott. By 1977, Polaroid had withdrawn from South Africa, spurring an international divestment movement that was crucial to bringing down apartheid. Anyways, just a cool thing of there actually were activists who noticed this and went outside of their way to make sure people were photographed well and to also go to these places like South Africa and during apartheid and make sure that they were able to subvert what they felt the camera's original goal was. And then
Oh,
literally,
yeah.
the Polaroid company, South Africa.
It's sickening that they had developed a camera with a boost technology specifically for passbook photo taking of Black people to support apartheid, which goes to show that the technology to photograph Black people was never the problem.
Yeah,
it was
of course.
People actually wanting to do it and do it well and for good reasons rather than supporting racism.
Yeah. Literally.
Gosh. And that continued on in like other things. There was an article that mentioned that in the early days of Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, they had issues lighting the skin tones because all of the color characters have different colored skin. And so it would cause issues because they couldn't calibrate it to everyone's skin tone in one setting. They hadn't figured out how to do that yet.
Yeah.
So it wasn't until later episodes that everyone started looking better on the TV. Like they just couldn't figure out how to calibrate them. And then also just it continues. Black photographers continue to share frustration with digital defaults requiring extra effort to capture darker skin accurately. Continues to be a problem. And then also just other things that I think are interesting. Racism that exists in stuff like even stock photography was something that came up that was interesting to me. Someone mentioned that you can't find stock photos of Black people like hiking. Like if you type in hiking family or something, like it's never going to be Black individuals that are doing so, which is very odd because of course they hike, they're regular people.
Of course, yeah.
So there's been like Instagram accounts that are built up. There's one called Black Travel Feed trying to reclaim the representation of everyday joy and visibility. Like Black individuals travel, they go on vacation, they sit on the beach. They like, how ridiculous is it that like they can't find photos of themselves in the simplest of situations just because that's not what has been built.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've never even thought about that, like with stock photography, because that's meant to be almost like the modern day Shirley cards, right? It's just the basic stock image that represents everything, represents everyone. Everyone can use this as a placeholder potentially, for whatever you're needing it for.
Yep.
But no, not really.
Nope, not really. Gosh.
Interesting.
It's getting a little better, I will say, with like modern day. But it's still ridiculous that like it's that difficult. And then also just like photography recently has been used as a tool in a lot of racial justice as a witness and a weapon. They brought up like Emmett Till's open casket or George Floyd's cell phone footage, just different ways that they've been able
like
to.
Through history. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
The camera continues to depict it all.
Yeah. And how it, even from the beginning, I feel like that the image of Emmett Till and like that story is obviously such a important one in the history of racial justice. So I think, yeah, to tie that, and I think tying that back to Frederick Douglass and like how it's just always been an important tool. Like I think being able to represent people for one, for what they really are, but then also represent events for what really happened too, where it's like if you're looking at the photographic evidence right in front of you, it's hard, like going to trump a witness account that, but no, this is what's right in front of me, whether that's a photo
Yeah.
or video evidence, and like I can make my own conclusions from this. So kind of what we talked about, like with being able to see things from all around the world now because of modern technology and social media, like it can help, I think, understand where your own biases might be coming from and what is being fed to you via like propaganda or whatever messaging is being put out there about different places in the world. It causes you to pause and consider. Like I said, I was literally like so ashamed and embarrassed when I saw this like beautiful city in Iran, and I was like, what was I picturing in my
Mhm.
mind? Like, and why was it
Yeah.
not this? Like, what on earth?
I know. I blame our textbooks for a lot of it, I'm not gonna lie. I think,
Oh,
like
okay, yeah.
yeah, like, growing up and seeing the photos that they picked for our textbook and everything, it was all, like, ancient photography of a lot of these
Totally.
places when, like,
There's still
col
people there.
yeah,
Yeah.
but they were also they've been working on their country and living there and developing things alongside the rest of the world this
Mm-hmm.
entire time. So I think it just takes a minute for your brain to catch up, and thank heavens we have opportunities to have that happen now.
Totally.
Oh.
Dang. I just think that's an interesting concept or question of who gets to decide what normal looks like. Cause
Mm.
like we talked about, I think at the beginning, I don't think Kodak was initially, they weren't being malicious. It was just, okay, we have to mass produce this. So let's pick an image that we think is going to be able to match as much people as possible. And perfect. There's the standards. There's the Shirley card.
Yep, and
I'm
they were probably looking around their company going,
This covers everybody. Yeah.
99% of the
True.
people in this company, this would work for them, and so
Mm-hmm.
they probably didn't even give it a second thought. I think where the racism comes in majority for them is the fact that there's no way that they didn't hear about the problem earlier
Totally.
than the chocolate and furniture companies, and they didn't fix it until the dollar amount was right.
Oh, of course, of course. And that's unfortunately, welcome to the world that we live in, I guess. That's
Yeah.
unfortunately what seems to be the actual decision maker here is not what's good and moral, but what, like you said, what's the dollar sign attached to it? What do we actually have to lose here? Can be bought, it seems.
Yeah, it does seem to be that way. Anyway, so that is Shirley.
So crazy to just be the random employee that they just happen to take your photo of that day, and suddenly you're the standard. I know what the answer is. I wonder if she was compensated in any way for that. Of course she wasn't.
Probably not.
Of course she
No,
wasn't. No,
highly
but
doubt it. They were like, "Here, sit down, smile. We need a photo of you for this." And it's okay. And then it's
and then
everywhere.
now she's like an iconic piece of history for film photography.
And like people
That's
collected them, like they collected
oh,
the
no
Shirley
way.
cards. Yeah, I think I saw something about that. And like guys would have crushes on Shirley because they were just like, "Oh, she's beautiful." Yeah, so the original one was just her in the button up, but they developed other Kodak Shirley cards as they continued. And it would be still called a Shirley card, but have a slightly different model. Of course, all white.
That is so funny though. That they're like,
Yep.
well, we don't want to confuse people. So it's a different woman, but this is also a Shirley card.
Yep.
It's
And then
so
it was
fun
all
how
calibrated the same. But one guy literally said that he has a crush on Shirley.
that's so funny. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that we need to touch on because there's so much.
I
There's just so
know.
much we could potentially go out there.
Oh, this is interesting. Shirley cards from the 1980s will still show up sometimes in the Kodak software that the lab uses from time to set the machines back to neutral.
Oh, interesting.
She's still here, Garcia says. We haven't really gotten away from her. She keeps coming back.
We can't escape Shirley.
Shirley becomes like a horror movie.
Oh man. Oh, here's something interesting is that I think this is something that comes up a lot in models. So in 2018, Tyler Mitchell became the first African American photographer to shoot a cover for Vogue in their 125-year
Mm.
history. What's interesting is that it was Beyonce who was the subject of the cover that chose Mitchell as her photographer. It wasn't Vogue making sure that they would have the best photographer to make sure that she could get her the best photo possibly taken, but it was her that went out of her way to request that. So
And that's
finally in
such a good
2018.
point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but then it's every single Black model that's getting their picture taken doesn't necessarily have a photographer who knows what they're doing with their skin. Like,
Yeah.
they don't know how to handle their skin tone. They're not going to calibrate the image correctly. Therefore, they're not looking the best that they possibly could be because they don't have
Mm-hmm.
someone who knows those extra steps, which is so crazy. It shouldn't be that hard to get a good photo of yourself. Like, it just.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a kind of a patch quill of an episode of just all these different things, but I think it's an important thing to touch on. And yeah, just a cool fun fact of history. Like I said, that this random woman named Shirley ended up playing such a huge role in the history of film photography and this medium. So super interesting.
Yep, her legacy apparently lives on. So,
And like we said, we can't escape Shirley. So
nope.
thank you for joining us for today's episode. We will be back next week, of course, with another one. So come join us. I'll be talking about my forgotten artist pick for the month. So come hang out. Come follow us on YouTube. Come like us on YouTube. Come subscribe. There.
And then be sure to tune in for Swifty September. It's coming, you guys.
September is Swift Miss here with More Than A Muse. That's for sure.
We have to gear up for the next album, you know? It's got to
Absolutely.
happen. So we'll be there. And then don't forget the merch is available for all of your fall incoming weather that you're going to want a sweatshirt for.
Absolutely.
So,
all right.
There it is.
See ya next time.
See ya. Bye.
Bye.